Hello, friends. This is Casey Gwynn, the president of the National Family Justice Center Alliance. We're very honored to have you join us for this month's webinar of the Alliance. We are broadcasting here from San Diego, California, in the offices of the National Family Justice Center Alliance, and we very much appreciate your participation with us in this today. We have more than 200 folks registered for this webinar, and we're very excited about it. You'll see on the screen the instructions for the webinar that gives you information about reaching out to Natalia Geary, our Director of Technical Assistance, who's managing the webinar along with Jennifer Anderson, and also gives you information about the ability, if you are logged in online, to click on the questions bar and be able to type the questions. We don't take live questions on a webinar with this many people on it, but we very much appreciate your questions as the webinar gets underway, and we're very happy to answer those. We generally take questions at the end of our presentations. And just a reminder that this will be recorded and will be available at FamilyJusticeCenter.com. We have an online resource library that's available to our 11,000 members and to others now, and most of our material is not password protected any longer. It is available directly to folks working in the field. So we're very happy to have you with us today for this webinar. We are looking forward to the focus of our topic today, and we have an incredible faculty for us. Meeting the civil legal needs of survivors and our focus on the Center for Solo Practitioners is very much the focus today, and we're excited to have you join us. Over the last probably 30 years that I've been working in the field of domestic violence intervention and prevention, I would venture to say that this area is the most significant need that we have ever dealt with, struggled with, worked through for survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault and their children. So we're very happy to have an amazing panel today to join us in order to focus on that. As I mentioned, my name is Casey Gwynn, and on behalf of Gail Strack and the whole team at the National Family Justice Center Alliance, we're very happy to have you with us today. We do want to thank our sponsor, the U.S. Department of Justice Office on Violence Against Women, for participating in funding this today. This is part of our National Family Justice Center Alliance grant. We provide technical assistance to organizations across the country that are operating family justice centers or developing family justice centers or other kinds of multi-agency models. And so we very much appreciate B. Hansen and the whole team at OVW for sponsoring this. We also want to give a shout out to our 2015 International Family Justice Conference. That conference is going to be held next April in San Diego, April 21 to 23 in 2015. That conference will actually involve renting an island that you see pictured here on the screen. That will be an island known as Paradise Point, and we anticipate selling out that conference. We anticipate having more than 500 attendees. I think we have a presenter on the phone. If you could mute your phone for us, we would appreciate it until it's time for you to speak so we don't get all your background noise. We'd appreciate it if you could mute your phone for us as we're hearing all your background noise while driving. I also want to give a shout out to our team, what Gail Strack calls our small but mighty team. Is a great team of folks that are helping us to both operate the Alliance and to host this webinar today. We do have a few reminders on our screen as well about the availability of MCLE and CEUs for this webinar. We are a provider in California, so our credits are allowed in California, but we do provide all the background information which would allow you to be able to get credits in other parts of the United States as well. The requirements in California are very stringent, and we find that with the materials we provide and the information we provide at the end of this webinar, you are able to pursue credits in your own state. The team that is providing this webinar today is a great group of folks. As I mentioned, my name is Casey Gwynn. I'm also joined by Gail Strack, our CEO. Elise McCoy is the director of the Solo Practice Concentration and Incubator Programs at Thomas Jefferson School of Law, and she is the founding director of the Center for Solo Practitioners. She's joining us today. We're also joined by Patrick Long, who's one of the founding attorneys of the Center for Solo Practitioners and operates his private practice right now out of the National Family Justice Center Alliance office space. And we're so honored to have Patrick be one of not only the founders of the Center for Solo Practitioners, but just doing an amazing job continuing to help us develop the model. We're also joined today by Lizbeth Perez, who's a survivor and small business owner now. We're very happy to say that we were able to help Lizbeth start her business. And Lizbeth is a former client of the San Diego Family Justice Center and really brings this perspective to the presentation today, the survivor perspective on what survivors need in the civil legal services arena. We're also hoping to have some brief comments from Fred Rooney, who's been called the father of incubators by the American Bar Journal and really is the founder of the first legal incubator in the country that focused on how to increase legal services with a focus on law school development of a program that helps develop solo practitioners as they're graduating from law school and starting their practice to really then enhance services for low-income, indigent, and other clients who need services in the legal arena but cannot afford them. So Fred really is kind of our mentor, our leader, and really the founder of a lot of the work that we're going to be talking about today. So we're happy to have Fred joining us ever so briefly. As we get started, I just want to provide a little bit of background to everything that we're going to be touching on today. When we talk about this whole notion of incubators and what Elise McCoy has been talking about in San Diego is really an accelerator model, the expansion of the incubator idea, we feel like it's important to really focus on the background. So that background will be what I will focus on. You'll see on the agenda the other folks that are going to comment as we get underway here. The array of models that exist in the civil legal services arena are very diverse. Over the years, obviously, the most common model is a model that involves what we would refer to as public interest attorneys, whether it's legal aid, whether it's folks working in other kinds of nonprofits where you are salarying and benefiting lawyers, and those lawyers are full-time focused on providing legal services to low-income folks who otherwise do not have access to legal services. So that public interest law firm model, that public interest attorney model is probably the oldest and I would say kind of the most traditional approach to comprehensive legal services for both victims of family violence and their children and to others in need of legal services. The pro bono model obviously has been around for decades, the notion that private practice attorneys will invest hours of their time to provide services on a free basis for those in need of legal services that cannot afford them is very prevalent around the country. We've had a lot of focus on it through the American Bar Association, through state bars, and that model is certainly something that we strongly support. But I think it's fair to say that neither the public interest attorney model nor the pro bono approach can possibly meet all the legal needs of victims and their children. We also want to talk a little bit about student-led legal clinics and law school-based student clinical programs. Each of those are certainly programs that have evolved around the country. The Office on Violence Against Women has helped fund a number of pilots in that area over the years, and we've seen a lot of law schools that have allowed students to develop that. I know early in my career, I met Sarah Buell, who had started the first student-led clinic at Harvard Law School, and was really a driver as a survivor of domestic violence in challenging Harvard in those early years to get involved in legal services for victims. So those are certainly resources as well in the array of models to provide for the legal needs of victims. And then I do want to mention the Legal Assistance to Victims program in the Office on Violence Against Women. Both OVW and OVC have been very focused on trying to increase legal services for victims. The Obama administration increased financial resources for the LAV program in OVW, and OVC has been doing some amazing work in recent years looking at wraparound legal services and what those models can look like, but with a primary focus on salary and benefited attorneys being funded through whatever the source is, whether it's OVC or OVW or other kinds of public funds. But as most of you may be aware, in 2007, Fred Rooney, working at CUNY in New York, really developed this concept of an incubator and how the law school could play a role in helping to develop more attorneys, doing more, providing more legal services to those in need of services that couldn't afford them. So it's kind of in that array of models that we're going to be discussing today, the incubator. I do want to give a big shout out to Gail Strack. Over the last 30 years, most of you know that Gail Strack has taken a picture of absolutely everything that's happened, just about anywhere she's ever been in the domestic violence and sexual assault and child abuse movement in America. And I did want to kind of put in a picture here of the brainstorming that started in San Diego, connected to the San Diego Family Justice Center. This was actually while we were doing some work with family justice centers in Europe, and this is actually a napkin that was drawn by Gail Strack in Paris in 2008 as our team was brainstorming the whole concept of how we could better meet the legal needs of victims and their children with a specific focus on domestic violence. This was essentially 6 years after we opened the San Diego Family Justice Center. The President's Family Justice Center Initiative had launched centers all over the country. We were getting a lot of international interest in wraparound legal services and their connection to social services and mental health support. But the reality was that there still wasn't enough available. We didn't have the ability to meet all the legal needs of victims. The system wasn't working. We didn't have the funds to hire enough attorneys to meet the needs. The legal aid model was certainly very limited. And the pro bono attorneys, though available, were also very limited. So after that brainstorming in 2008, we reached out to the San Diego Superior Court. We reached out to a whole array of legal service providers in San Diego, including the San Diego Volunteer Lawyers Program, the Center for Community Services, the YWCA, and a number of others, and really challenging them to think through this whole concept of how we could develop a legal network that, with a combination of public interest lawyers that were salaried and benefited, and a combination of pro bono attorneys and other kinds of approaches, so we could better meet the legal needs. I also want to recognize Judge Lorna Oxney, who was then the presiding judge of the San Diego Superior Court Family Court Division, who helped us really focus on the needs and the concepts. And the concept really developed in 2008 to try to develop a legal network that could meet all the needs of victims of domestic violence and sexual assault and their children. The notion was that if we partnered with law schools, if we partnered with the Superior Court, if we really integrated the Family Justice Center social and mental health services, that we could develop a vision that would meet the needs in a much more comprehensive way than what we were being able to do at the time. And that vision was an exciting one. That vision was incredibly robust, but the reality is that at the time we didn't have the ability to make that vision a reality. Now we're going to be talking about how that vision is becoming a reality today. But before we do that, I want to turn it over to Gail Strack to talk a little bit about this whole notion of the needs and the challenges, because as we created that vision, we had to put it up against how significant the needs and challenges were that we were facing dealing with victims and their children.
Well, thank you, Casey, and it's exciting to have this conversation now. I think the time is right. And at the time, it was quite an interesting journey. I had been the San Diego Family Justice Center director for about 5 years, and my eyes were just blown wide open with all of the challenges that victims were facing. Being a former prosecutor, we were focused on criminal prosecution, and it wasn't until you see victims coming in each and every day and needing so much more than just criminal prosecution. So I'm going to advance the slides, and what happened at that time is that obviously at every family justice center, not just in San Diego, but throughout the nation and internationally, victims wanted the same thing everywhere. They needed legal support to address their physical safety. They also needed the support to deal with their broken heart, to deal with the challenges that they were suffering. And together we realized that we needed to go fast forward. And it was also very exciting to have a vision of what that could look like in the future. So when we finally got to that point, our course to get our vision in place, it was exciting. People were very excited. And it was fairly easy to recruit interns and volunteers and pro bono attorneys. And within a very short period of time of a crisis happening, we were able to mobilize an entire army of kind-hearted legal scholars, interns, and attorneys. And the victims really needed it because in our San Diego Superior Court, they were dealing with approximately 500 restraining orders each and every month. So we did mobilize. But one of the things that we did once we started our own legal clinic at the San Diego Family Justice Center in 2009, we also wanted to study it. We wanted to study it with the eyes and heart of survivors. And at that time, we already had our Voices Committee up and running. So what we did is that we learned from our colleagues who had already started different programs. And we took the best of the best and got us going. But after 6 months, we said, let's look back and what did we learn? And in reviewing almost 300 cases and talking to 70 survivors, which was really at that time a lot of survivors, because many folks know survivors are transient. They move around. We might lose their number, but at the Family Justice Center, they were more than willing to help us out. So we analyzed those applications and restraining orders. We talked to the clients, and this is what we found. We found that the clients wanted more. They wanted more support when it came to filling out the forms. The forms were really quite daunting, and it took us as attorneys quite a while to figure it all out ourselves. They needed help with court preparation. They needed help with debriefing after the hearing because they truly didn't understand what was happening. It was all happening very quickly. It was very scary and hard to sort out. Some of them didn't even know which courtroom they were in, whether it was criminal, juvenile, or civil, because they were in a different mindset. And they also said, we want court support, advocacy in the courtroom. They themselves wanted more risk assessment and safety planning even after the initial intake. And then once they got through that process, they wanted legal assistance. What was interesting to me and what we saw in the dynamic, what was happening at the San Diego Family Justice Center, is that with wraparound services, we saw more victims getting the restraining orders, keeping the restraining orders, and moving forward to get divorces. And as they were getting divorces and they were getting their child custody orders and their child support orders, then they needed help with enforcement of those orders. So things were changing in the world of family justice centers. And as we were asking them what more did they needed help with the evidence. Because when they're getting the restraining order at that time, they're not in the mindset to really think about what evidence do they need. And of course, they needed more court representation. Because after we got those court orders, we saw that many of those offenders were now violating the restraining orders, and we needed to go back in. One of the things that we learned from our survivors very quickly is that when they did get the court support, it really pulled them together. It made them stronger. It was empowering, and they were able to take the necessary steps that they wanted to take. So one of the things that we learn when you are prosecutors going into the world of civil legal services is that with evidence, with collaboration, with the wraparound model, you can improve things. And what we saw after we implemented our new protocol about including one piece of evidence in every restraining order, there were less continuances because the evidence was attached to the application. We went from about 78% of the time temporary restraining orders were issued to 99% of the time. At the permanent hearing, we went from 55% of the time of those hearings being granted to up to 78%. So evidence really mattered. But it was still a very daunting process. And after 5 years, we realized that it was a hard program to maintain. While we were very fortunate to have the support of Avon to help us launch that project, and we were very creative with various grants, even utilizing the support of CDBG, maintaining civil legal services, we found out very painfully, was one of the hardest things to fund. So we were at the same time that Fred Rooney was working on the incubator model, we were thinking about what could take us to the next level in San Diego. So the stars really began to align. And now I want to switch it over to Lizbeth, who will share her story. Casey?
Thanks, Gail. I do want to ask Lizbeth Perez to just share a little bit before we dive into the incubator model and what's going on in San Diego and how we're trying to basically move this forward now to the next level. Hopefully be able to have Fred Rooney, really the founder of incubators in the United States, share a little bit with us on this webinar. But before we do that, when it's all said and done, this is all about survivors. And as Gail mentioned, Lizbeth Perez is an amazingly courageous survivor who was a client of the San Diego Family Justice Center, who then became part of our Voices Committee and now speaks publicly on behalf of survivors and their children in the media in San Diego. I was very honored to have her son come to Camp Hope this summer, our national camping program that we run for children exposed to domestic violence, and Rodolfo just had an amazing time with us this summer at camp. And Lizbeth also, as she's stayed involved with us and become part of our community around all of this, has also developed a business model. We were honored to be part of that with a micro loan, and she is now running a janitorial business in San Diego and really building a business model that we're very excited about. But I want to ask Lizbeth to just share a little bit about this whole issue of the needs of survivors around legal services and her own experience in this journey. Because when it's all said and done, that's why we're having this webinar. That's what this is all about, is how do we meet the needs of survivors and their children.
Hello, my name is Lizbeth. I'm a survivor of domestic abuse. I was in an abusive relationship for 7 years. I'm a single mom with 3 children. And one of my needs, as I started my journey to need legal services to protect myself and my children from my abuser, was an emergency restraining order. That's how a police officer sent me to the Family Justice Center. It was scary, but the volunteers and the staff at the Family Justice Center made the process pretty easy and smooth for me. And actually getting the emergency restraining order was an easy process for me. And after getting the emergency restraining order, they helped me to get the permanent restraining order, which I had no idea. It was scary for me because I didn't have a legal status. So that was something I was not confident on doing, but they helped me and they gave me the support I needed. When we went to get the permanent restraining order, they sent an advocate with me to support me and explain, and they also explained to me the process and how to appear at court, and Dress for Success helped me to dress properly to attend to court. All these little details that I totally didn't know anything about, that I received education about. After I got my permanent restraining order, I was in the middle of finding an emergency shelter and then looking for transitional housing. But when I was at the emergency shelter, one of the case workers told me that there was this program in immigration that victims who were married to permanent resident or U.S. citizens could qualify for a U visa or a VAWA, which I didn't know about. And they helped me to find nonprofit organizations who offered those services with any cost, but they had waiting lists for a year. And it was a long time because as I was looking for transitional housing, they needed someone who, they couldn't accept people without a legal status because they were not able to help them to find a job. So I was at that moment, it was really a really hard time for me because it was scary, because if I didn't have a legal status, I was not able to find a safe place for me and my kids. So my friends of my family, really close friends to my family, offered to help me financially to pay for an immigration attorney. which didn't do anything for my kids for 6 months, and that delayed my process to get a transitional housing and find a safe place for me and my kids. And the attorney didn't do anything, and I was really, really having a hard time because I didn't qualify for any services either because I didn't have a legal status. But then I found another attorney who my family helped me pay for, and the only reason why I couldn't wait for other attorneys to help me was because I had to wait a year. I couldn't wait a year to find a safe place for me and my kids. So I found an immigration attorney who gave me a really low cost to help me fix my legal status. And as I was going through that case, I found out that my marriage was never registered in the county, so it was not valid. So I had to go through another legal process to get my marriage valid, and I had to go to court, which I had to do everything by myself because there was no attorney who had an idea how to do that. I don't remember the legal term for that case, for that kind of type of cases, but it was really complicated. But I was finally able to deal it with myself it took me like 3 months to get my marriage certified and then apply for VAWA, which that delayed also me getting benefits and getting to transitional housing. I didn't have to struggle with custody or divorce because I was granted a permanent restraining order for 5 years, but I have seen many cases as a volunteer. I have heard a lot of stories of victims who have just struggled getting custody of their kids and getting their divorce and just getting their abusers out of their lives. But sometimes they are forced to have contact with them for their children, which is really dangerous and scary for them. And there's no help for them because they don't have the education, they don't have the support, the legal support to help them get I don't know how to say it, like that legal support to help them go through that situation and just feel more safe having that support. And after years, now that I'm a small business owner, I have tried to look for services also to help me with understanding the legal terms. And now that I'm starting my business, and it's just really hard to find that one-to-one help with any cost or really low cost. It's not possible. It's really hard to find, and it's really complicated when you're just getting out of an abusive relationship and just trying to move forward and not having that financial status to help you move forward. And that's why I'm really excited about this Justice Legal Network. I know it's going to be a huge, huge help for a lot of victims who went through the same struggles as I did or are going through. And just having these practitioners that have that compassion to help others, to help victims, I think it's essential to be in this field and to help survivors of domestic abuse. And I look forward to have this idea become real.
Thanks, Lizbeth. So that's what it's all about. We appreciate you sharing your story. Lizbeth just recently received her green card and is now legally in the United States, and that journey was a long one, but she stuck with it, and she is now making a living through her business and still very much a part of our community, which is one of the things that we want to talk about in this webinar. One of the things that's grabbed us over the years is this is just not about getting a service for somebody. It has to be about developing a community where people are welcomed in during the crisis, their needs are met, and then they're welcome to stay to be not only loved and supported, but to become part of relationships and friendships and long-term assistance in which they can give back to others, and their needs as they change and evolve can also be met in that journey. So we very much appreciate Elizabeth sharing her story. And it was in that context of us brainstorming what we could do, us developing the Family Justice Center Legal Network, which I really give great credit to Gail Strack for her passion and determination and vision with that, to then evolving into where do we go from here. We can do crisis intervention legal services. We can do restraining orders. We had pro bono attorneys assisting with uncontested divorces. We had folks assisting pro bono with matters that didn't require a long cause work or a lot of time and effort. But when the needs got more complicated, whether they were immigration matters or dissolution matters, what then? And it was in that journey that I was very honored to meet Fred Rooney. Fred, who I referred to earlier as really the father of the incubator model in the United States, had begun his legal career in the 1980s and had become involved on the faculty in 1998 at CUNY School of Law. And as Fred really developed this notion of incubators, he not only started the incubator at CUNY, but then ended up in San Diego a number of years later, and I met Fred in San Diego when he was working with Bob Seibel at Cal Western School of Law and Luz Herrera at Thomas Jefferson School of Law, and was just captivated by his passion, his vision, his determination, what he'd done in New York. And it was in that journey that we really felt this is the model that we need to adopt, develop, expand, maybe make some adaptations to fit our own community and our own needs in the Family Justice Center world. So Fred is actually on the phone. Fred is in transit, but we're hoping to be able to ask Fred to share a little bit with us on this webinar. He is driving as we speak, but he is going to hopefully be able to pull over and share a little bit with us. Fred's been honored in so many different ways for his work. He just finished a Fulbright scholarship in the Dominican Republic, where he launched the first law school incubator outside the United States. 3 months after he returned from the Dominican Republic, the American Bar Journal named him the 2013 Legal Rebel of the Year, and did in fact recognize him as the father of incubators. He's now the director of the Toro Law Center's International Justice Center for postgraduate development, and really a mentor and a visionary in all of this. And we wanted Fred to share a little bit before we dive into what we're doing in San Diego with Fred's vision. Fred, are you able to hear me at this point? Well, we're going to keep trying to get a hold of Fred. He has been on the call, and he may be off the call right now. But if Fred is able to join us and call back in, we're going to ask Fred to share a little bit with us as we go forward with this. I will say, though, that one of the things that's exciting to us is we took Fred's vision forward, and as we began to spend time with Fred, and Luz Herrera at Thomas Jefferson School of Law really began to invest an enormous amount of effort in developing the vision for Thomas Jefferson, that she pulled in a woman named Lalise McCoy, who is now the director of the Center for Solo Practitioners, who I mentioned earlier. Lalise had an amazing private practice. She worked in the consumer arena and was a consumer attorney for many years, very well respected in the legal community in San Diego. She had dedicated her practice to representing plaintiffs in consumer protection cases. I actually met her when she was the president of the Lawyers Club of San Diego. She's also been very involved in the State Bar Association. She's served as the co-president of the Tom Homan Law Association. And when Lalise got pulled into developing this vision for an incubator at the Center for Solo Practitioners at Thomas Jefferson, we just had no doubt that we needed to be in a relationship with Lalise, because she's a visionary and a doer and a leader. And so I want to turn it over to Lalise McCoy to talk about the Center for Solo Practitioners in San Diego and the work that she has been doing.
Casey, thank you so much. It's such an honor to be here with all of you, and certainly this is not only an honor to be here at this webinar, but it has also been a terrific honor to be involved with the Family Justice Center and the Family Justice Center Alliance here in San Diego since September 2012. September 2012 was not only the time that I signed an MOU with the Family Justice Center Alliance, but it's also when I learned that Gail Strack takes a photograph of everything. And there we are, shaking hands and also signing the Memorandum of Understanding between Thomas Jefferson School of Law and the Center for Solo, and developing the Center for Solo Practitioners, and beginning this wonderful collaboration with the Family Justice Center Alliance. I remember when I was president of Lawyers Club and meeting Casey, and it was just at that time that all of San Diego was abuzz with this exciting, amazing new model for the delivery of services to victims of domestic violence. So I've been a fan of Casey and Gail's for many, many years, and I was just absolutely thrilled to enter into this collaboration with them. I want to talk to you a little bit about the backdrop of incubators from the perspective of somebody in legal academia. And so let's move on to the next slide here. Okay, so the backdrop then is that first and foremost, there is a crisis in terms of the delivery of legal services in California and in San Diego, and I would venture to say also within the United States. In California, this is a statistic from the Judicial Council, there are 4.3 million self-represented litigants in California, and I would imagine that it is no surprise to any of you listening that many of those people are victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, other traumas, that they are from modest means backgrounds or socioeconomically disadvantaged backgrounds. There's a saying that justice delayed is justice denied, and many of these folks, like Lizbeth, who are not familiar with the legal system and have to go in self-represented, are both delayed and denied justice because of the burden of not having legal representation. There's also been a court funding crisis in the state of California, dating back now a few years, and that has greatly impacted the ability of the courts to handle cases, especially cases involving self-represented litigants. There are fewer law firms hiring. There are fewer traditional avenues for lawyers and new law grads to get into traditional jobs, but that does not change the fact that there continues to be an incredible need for legal services. The American Bar Association, especially through the work of Will Hornsby and the Standing Committee on the Delivery of Legal Services, a committee that had Professor Luz Herrera and Fred Rooney's involvement for many years, as well as state bars from around the nation, have been calling for practice-ready graduates. And in addition, while all of this is going on, we also have the millennials coming up. They're now beginning to matriculate into law school and graduate, and there's a certain generational predisposition towards entrepreneurship if you are a millennial. So all of that work together to create sort of a perfect storm for opportunities for incubators. And so in November 2012, we started with the first cohort. This was the first group of lawyers, all graduates from Thomas Jefferson School of Law, who began their practices in the Center for Solo Practitioners, co-located here with the Family Justice Center Alliance. You can see them here at their reception announcing their law firms and their involvement with the center and their involvement with the Family Justice Center Alliance. And in addition, you can also see here on their first boot camp day with Casey and Gail and all of us holding our hands up in solidarity with the domestic violence movement. One of the things that I felt fairly strongly about when I started this program was that we wanted to choose folks for the first class who were extremely motivated and well qualified. And Thomas Jefferson School of Law, fortunately, has no shortage of qualified and outstanding alumni. It's a privilege for me to be there. So what we did is, thanks to the good work of Fred Rooney and others before him, we had some sample applications, and we created an application that very specifically asked for certain things. Certainly it asked for background information, but it also very specifically asked each lawyer who was interested in starting their solo practice with the Family Justice Center Alliance and the Center for Solo Practitioners, if they would be willing to sign on the dotted line that they were passionate about public interest law and helping people and starting law practices that were not just for the purpose of supporting themselves or supporting their families, but also had a community mindset and a passion and a drive to help those in difficult circumstances. So we had the application, and then also I felt very strongly that there be an interview process. So we went through a very, very careful application and interview process, and that is how we ended up with the 8 folks who comprised the first cohort of the Center for Solo Practitioners. Now, part of the process involved a self-selection process. So those of you who might be at some point interested in incorporating an incubator or accelerator model in your Family Justice Center for the purpose of increasing and enhancing civil legal services to victims, I would recommend that you look for the following things. First and foremost, you have to self-select. You have to look for people who are self-selecting for entrepreneurship. As Casey mentioned, this is not the old model where we are providing W-2 jobs for people who want to come and do some good work and then go home. These are folks who are starting their own law practices in collaboration with a nonprofit such as the Family Justice Center, and they are motivated and energized and enthusiastic about all that is involved in starting their own business. In addition, they have to self-select for a collaborative environment. This is not really for people who are loners who just want to do their own thing. They also have to self-select for access to justice, and again, that goes back to the application. I was very, very clear with each person that I interviewed that not only was I interested in finding folks who were good lawyers and solid entrepreneurs, but people who had a heart and a passion for access to justice, especially folks who have been victims of domestic violence. They had to self-select for a value-centered practice. In other words, they had to see the practice of law as a calling, as a passion, as something that is more than a business. They had to self-select for community service, and of course, probably nearest and dearest to my heart is they had to self-select for professionalism and ethics. The practice of law is extremely demanding. There are many things that pull on the average lawyer on any given day, and to not be moored in a sense of professionalism and ethics can be a recipe for disaster, not only for the lawyer, but especially for their clients. The structure, I want to talk a little bit about the structure. I'm a structure person by nature. I like to have structure, and I felt strongly that in starting this program with Casey and Gail, even though they have tremendous structure here at the Family Justice Center Alliance, you're an extremely well-run organization. I could see that on a daily basis. I felt strongly that I had to also bring my own structure into the Center for Solo Practitioners. We begin as a cohort. We begin in January, and we go through December. And in January, we start with a boot camp where I bring in professionals who will help these young lawyers start their law practices on the right foot, including folks who come in and talk about ethics and professionalism and high quality, the ability to provide high quality services to clients. I introduced the members of the Center for Solo Practitioners to mentors. We have weekly meetings, and both group and individual. I meet with each member of the Center for Solo Practitioners, each young lawyer, weekly. And I wanted to touch on what Lisbeth said. Some of her experiences with the lawyers were that they were not as responsive to her, or they took a long time. And that is something that we try to weed out completely, and we have a lot of oversight and accountability through this structure and through the weekly meetings to be able to provide lawyers who are able to respond to their clients with the highest level of professionalism. We do grant initiatives that bring our lawyers out into the community to provide service to those who are the most needy. We also do quarterly strategic planning meetings with Gail Strack. She is, in addition to all of her other many talents, a very talented strategic planning coordinator. And also we provide space. And space is one of the things that we, of course, naturally receive from the Family Justice Center Alliance. Each of the lawyers here has a locking desk and a shared office with a locking door to provide as high a level of client confidentiality as possible, Wi-Fi, high-speed copier, membership for a year to the continuing education of the Bar On Law program, which provides comprehensive research, Westlaw at a dedicated terminal. Again, this is thanks to the work of Fred Rooney in providing that to all incubators throughout the nation, conference rooms, Knox attorney service, so a professional runner service, and light reception. Now, all of this is provided in tandem with the Family Justice Center Alliance. And the folks who are starting their practices get all of this at a quite a discounted rate. The reason they're able to qualify for this rate, however, is because, again, they have signed on the dotted line that they are all in when it comes to helping victims of domestic violence. They provide, each of them provides 50 hours of pro bono work to victims of domestic violence, including working on restraining orders, including giving advice as to child custody matters or spousal support matters, and all manner of legal services. And that is one of the things that you are going to hear about from Patrick Long. And I just want to say one more thing, that in addition to all of this, as I looked at all of this structure that we had put in place for the last year, and I continued my own study on the incubator movement in the United States, and I was drawn to an article by Bill Aulette in TechCrunch that discussed the difference between incubators and accelerators. And traditionally, incubators have provided workspace and community and an indefinite time. And then I read about accelerators, which talks about workspace provided to a specific cohort for a fixed time with structure with regard to education and coaching. And I really felt that what we were developing here at the Family Justice Center Alliance was more of an accelerator model, a very targeted, specific, value-based model that had a lot of structure for the lawyers and also, as a result, for the folks that were helping the clients and the victims of domestic violence. So I'm going to turn it back to Casey now, who will then introduce one of our founders in the Center for Solo Practitioners, Patrick Long.
Thanks, Lalise. You can see why we love Lalise's leadership and her passion and her vision in developing the Center for Solo Practitioners and literally creating this army of lawyers to assist victims and their children. One of the other people that we love in this is Patrick Long. Patrick has been with us since the beginning. He's one of the founding attorneys of the Center for Solo Practitioners. He runs his private practice here out of the offices of the Alliance at 707 Broadway in downtown San Diego. Patrick was a Navy corpsman for many years, worked with the Marine Corps in San Diego, and then went on to law school, obviously with a lot of gifts in the leadership arena and public speaking and advocacy arenas. Went on to law school, got involved with the Veterans Legal Assistance Clinic while he was at Thomas Jefferson School of Law. And then after beginning his practice, was one of the attorneys that applied to be one of the founding attorneys at the Center for Solo Practitioners. And as soon as I met Patrick, I had no doubt why Lalise liked him so much and why he was going to be such an important part of the future of the Center for Solo Practitioners. Patrick went through the first cohort, and then he didn't want to leave. He created a whole approach and proposal to say, we're now a community, and if this is really going to be more than an incubator, there's no reason for us to leave. We can support the next cohort of solo practitioners, and I and my allies here that want to stay can develop our own practices while we're still part of this, and we want to be involved with the Family Justice Center and the Alliance, and we said absolutely. And so I want to turn it over to Patrick to share a little bit about his experience, because as my dad used to say, a person with an experience is never at the mercy of a person with an argument. It's why Lizbeth's experience is so important, and it's why Patrick's experience is so important, because he's the one that's actually done the work. Gail and Lalise and I have dreamed about it, we've advocated for it, but Patrick's actually done it, lived it, and figured out how to make a living while helping others in the process. So let me turn it over to Patrick Long.
Thank you, Casey. It's a pleasure to be here today. I am one of the original members of the Center for Solo Practitioners. Like Louise had discussed, we initially came together in November 2012, and I spent the next year basically building my practice and working with the Alliance and the Family Justice Center in providing pro bono, low bono legal services to those in need. What I'm going to discuss today a little bit is about my personal experience with joining the Center for Solo Practitioners with Louise McCoy and my other colleagues, and talk about my experience with the Family Justice Center Alliance. Like Casey had mentioned, my background included two other previous careers, one being a Navy corpsman, the other one being a technical writer. Before I went to law school, coming out of law school, I decided that I did not want to start working with an organization again, and I wanted to begin my own practice. And from there, I discovered that Louise McCoy and Thomas Jefferson School of Law was starting their own incubator program, and that it would be a great experience for me to not only start my own business, but also, you know, an avenue for me to do what I love, which is provide access to justice to those in need. And part of the joining of it, when I interviewed with Louise McCoy, was that not only would I have access to help those in need, that I would also be able to work with other attorneys that are starting their businesses to learn about how to build my business, learn about the area of law and networking and advertising. These are valuable tools that are not necessarily taught in law school, but were available to me through Louise and the Center for Solo Practitioners. As Louise talked about, we had weekly meetings that all the attorneys would get together and we would discuss our cases, maintaining confidentiality, of course. And from there, we were able to discuss how our businesses were growing, anything that worked or didn't work, and we were able to swap ideas in regards to how to handle cases and how to handle our businesses individually. From there, we also were able to build teams and team projects that, as individuals, we may not be able to handle, but working together, we were able to help clients better as signing on together as attorneys. One of the benefits for the Center for Solo Practitioners was the exposure that I got from working with the Family Justice Center and the Alliance, and the ability to, you know, build my name as the practice was growing. And my name was very important in referrals from not only the Family Justice Center and from all the other pro bono work that I did. I realized that working with the Family Justice Center, I was able to build my reputation and to build sort of like everyone's knowledge of what it was I was able to provide. As Louise talked about, the Family Justice Center Alliance provided us an opportunity to basically build our practice from giving us, in exchange for pro bono work, rental space below market value and all the abilities that go with an office space, conference room, Wi-Fi, access to printers, and other tools that we were needed to build our practice. And Gail, obviously, as we talked about already, provided us with the quarterly strategic planning and helped us build our goals. What was it that we needed to do? Where was it that we needed to go? Not only with the Alliance, but I also work with the Family Justice Center. Within the Family Justice Center, I work closely with the legal network and client services to provide pro bono services to the clients of the Family Justice Center. Just like Lizbeth was talking about, that she would have benefited from our services the time that she went through the Family Justice Center. Not only was I able to provide the domestic violence paperwork, but eventually I went on to build a clinic at the Family Justice Center, providing questions and answers to those who were not sure what they should do next, in conjunction with the domestic violence, which would include child custody, child support, and dissolution. And in those clinics, I was able to start giving classes to the military advocates, domestic violence advocates in the area, and again, building my name and reputation that would eventually lead to referrals and building my practice. This was one of the key components in building my practice, was the ability to do the pro bono work and build my name. As Luis was mentioning, that one of the things that we had to go through during the interview process was a question and answering component that included a writing and what it was that we felt was important. When she first asked me what it meant to be an attorney, I said to myself, and I said to her, that what it means to be an attorney is to be a voice for those who struggle to speak up for themselves. And the Family Justice Center provides that. And us as attorneys building the new Justice Legal Network are going to be able to provide these services to people like Lizbeth who really, really could benefit from them. At this point, I'd like to turn it back over to Casey.
Well, thanks, Patrick, for sharing your experience and your story. You've done it. You've proven that we can develop this kind of a relationship with private practice attorneys that can develop a practice, make a living, and still do public interest work. And maybe some of it, yes, is pro bono, but some of it in much more interesting fixed fee and sliding scale models, which I want to talk about here in just a minute. So I do want to talk about the bigger vision. Luis has talked about the development of the Center for Solo Practitioners. We've talked about kind of our journey leading up to that and all the thinking and brainstorming we did. We talked about our work with survivors, realizing that we weren't meeting their needs. But now we want to really share the bigger vision, because our vision is to literally build an army of attorneys who live together, who are co-located together, who take the concepts of co-location that we've learned from multidisciplinary team models, Family Justice Center models, from coordinated community response models, and really build that into a long-term community model that can long-term meet the needs of victims of domestic violence and sexual assault and their children, and do it in such a way that we're not just providing a service, we're creating a community of social change around this in the process. So that vision, I've kind of laid out here a little bit as Gail and Luis and I have been thinking about this with the board of the National Family Justice Center Alliance, with Dean Thomas Guernsey at Thomas Jefferson School of Law. We've had the opportunity to bounce some of this off of Fred Rooney along the way, and Luis has had the chance now to present the model to other schools in California, other law schools. We had the opportunity to have a bunch of folks come and tour here at the Alliance recently from schools around the state of California. So we kind of want to lay it out for you. The vision is essentially that the Center for Solo Practitioners, which is sponsored by Thomas Jefferson School of Law, which is currently focused on graduates of Thomas Jefferson School of Law who pass the bar and want to begin their private practice, their solo practices, in a social interest approach, not just going off, as Elise said, by themselves and siloing and doing their own practice, but really want to do it in a community that's more than just an office suite, that really has a cause attached to it. That we take that Center for Solo Practitioners piece with Elise's leadership, and Elise is funded by Thomas Jefferson School of Law. It's a financial commitment of the law school to support their graduates and make this program central to the future of Thomas Jefferson School of Law. And then combine it with what we're now beginning to call the Justice Legal Network. And we are evolving this as we speak. But the notion behind the Justice Legal Network is when you graduate from the Center for Solo Practitioners, and in Elise's model here, it's basically a year-long program. When you graduate from that and you have a sense of how to start your practice, you've received strategic planning support, you've received subject matter training, you've received all the support you need in developing your private practice, what then? And what then, in the absence of the Justice Legal Network, is you leave the Center for Solo Practitioners and you go off on your own practice. We don't want that to be the only option. We want lawyers to have the ability to do what Patrick did and 7 other lawyers in the first cohort did, and that's it. We want to stay. We want to build this into something that will matter in the context of the rest of our careers and will matter in the lives of hundreds and I would say thousands of survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault. So the notion that is that after you graduate from the Center for Solo Practitioners, the Justice Legal Network will be available to you, and that will include continuing to have office space. While we won't be able to subsidize rent as much in the Center for Solo in the Justice Legal Network as we do in the Center for Solo Practitioners, the notion is you'd stay and you would be partnered in an office suite with other attorneys who have graduated from the center, and I will say potentially other attorneys who may not have gone through the Center for Solo Practitioners. One of the things I've been fascinated by is as Patrick and his team have developed this vision to stay together and support each other in their private practice, stay involved with the work with victims and their kids, they've found other attorneys who care, other attorneys who are like-minded, who want their practice to not just be about making a living, but also want to do this other work to make a difference in the lives of victims and their kids. So the notion is you would graduate into the Justice Legal Network, likely stay co-located, whether it's in the offices here at the Alliance or it's in other office space that we will rent in an office suite model, recruiting others that are interested in the model, and then continuing to receive support from the National Family Justice Center Alliance. That model right there would require funding, and so we are in the process right now of developing that funding. I want to give a special thanks to the Verizon Foundation for providing some seed money for us. We want to thank the San Diego County Bar Association and a number of others who have helped us begin to provide funding for this. Our vision is essentially to develop 2 funding pieces to it. One would be a revolving litigation expense fund that would allow us to assist attorneys that are doing personal injury cases, that have other litigation expenses that they cannot afford to fund themselves, that we would develop a revolving litigation expense fund where they can essentially borrow money from that fund for litigation expenses at 0 interest and then pay the fund back at the conclusion of their litigation. And 2, what we're calling the Justice Promise Fund, which is really the notion that the law keeps its promise when we actually provide the services that victims need and justice actually is done. And the notion behind the Justice Promise Fund would be similar to what Fred Rooney did in New York, where we actually seek to develop funding to provide fixed fee and sliding scale funding for legal services that would be available to attorneys inside the Justice Legal Network and the Center for Solo Practitioners so that they can be paid for their work. And we're working right now with our 15 lawyers that are part of this program to develop the construct around that, the fee schedules, what we would be able to pay for an uncontested divorce, what we might pay for a disputed child custody matter, the kinds of legal support that victims need, immigration legal services. We're developing that right now, but the notion is that in all of this, we would have funding sources attached to this, and it wouldn't depend on having to salary and benefit public interest lawyers. It wouldn't depend on having to come up with all of the money from some kind of grant source. They will be funding their own salaries from the development of their private practices. And it involves a little bit of a change for us, I will tell you, as those who advocate in the field of domestic violence and sexual assault. We have multiple criminal defense attorneys now that are part of the Center for Solo Practitioners and the Justice Legal Network. And those criminal defense attorneys are living with us. And I will tell you, after 20 years as a prosecutor, I've needed a little bit of counseling and a little bit of medication over the years. Gail started her career as a criminal defense attorney, so that was a little easier for her. But for me as a prosecutor, a career prosecutor, to say we need criminal defense attorneys to be part of our incubator and our accelerator model, that was tough for me. But I've already seen the benefit of it. We've had domestic violence victims who have been in need of a criminal defense lawyer. Our criminal defense lawyers are learning about domestic violence, living with us, being trained by us, and they need to be a very central part of what we do. So as the practice develops, as the vision develops, we envision all of it. We envision not just the family law piece, the immigration law piece. We envision folks doing business development law that will help folks like Lisbeth as they're developing their business. We envision personal injury work. Gail and I have a passion and a dream to one day see men who strangle and assault women with strangulation assault held accountable in the personal injury arena. In cases that large law firms would never take, large PI firms would never take, but our attorneys could take, well trained by us who run the Training Institute on Strangulation Prevention, we would love to see some personal injury cases come out of this as well. So the notion is Center for Solo Practitioners evolves into the Justice Legal Network, which all becomes a community. Then the question really, I think, for all of us is, what could that look like in other parts of the country? If we really were to develop this, and as it's happening now, we're beginning to get the vision to be bigger and bigger, what else can it address? We have shied away from simply saying we're going to do legal services of all kinds for all those of modest means who need legal services. We want to stay focused on a cause area that is near and dear to our work, which is related to child abuse and domestic violence and elder abuse and sexual assault and the issues related to that. So what would that look like if we can develop this, and how could it become a replicable model in other places? We have no doubt that it could be replicated where there are family justice centers. But I also want to point out that even as we're developing it here, we're moving it beyond the San Diego Family Justice Center. We just recently had a meeting with all the child trauma therapists at the Chadwick Center for Children and Families, which is our local child advocacy center in San Diego. And those therapists are seeing survivors of domestic violence and their children every day in their private practice in the therapeutic community. And they, too, need legal services. And some of them are clients of the San Diego Family Justice Center, and some of them aren't. So now we're beginning to really look at what does it look like if this model could be developed in the community and you could ally yourself with all kinds of nonprofits. Who would be the lead agency? Who would develop it? That's certainly a central piece. The law school, a local law school, is part of this model. It's part of the incubator model. It's part of the notion of how you would develop this army of attorneys. But beyond that, what organization and communities could take the lead? A single siloed nonprofit would have a tough time, I think, developing a practice where you've got services being provided to all the nonprofits, but it could do it. If a nonprofit was really focused on community-based work, coordinated community response work, alliances, and strategic partnerships, we can envision that developing as well. So we want to see that happen in this process as well. As we kind of frame this out a little bit, we've got a whole bunch of questions coming in, and as we dive into some of these questions, I'll kind of throw them out and pass them around a little bit. A number of questions have come in about this whole issue of safety planning, the whole issue of the needs of victims, the complex needs in the middle of risk and danger, whether it's a stalking victim or a victim fleeing for her life, and how you provide legal services in that context with this model in a safe way. I'm going to ask Gail to address that risk assessment and safety planning piece, because we have no doubt that the legal approach by itself without other support is a very dangerous situation for survivors. We've seen it for 30 years in our work in San Diego and around the country. So I think it's talking about this whole issue of safety planning and risk assessment is very important. Let's start there. Gail, if you want to take that one.
Thank you, Casey. I think that one had my name all over it. And I was ready like a volunteer, pick me. When it comes to this issue, and I'm so glad you brought it up, we did a focus group before we started our legal clinic at the restraining order clinic at the San Diego Family Justice Center, and safety was an issue. And one of the things that I learned being an adjunct professor at Cal Western is that the law students who were working at the San Diego Family Justice Center noticed something very different. The clients that they talked to at the Family Justice Center versus the clients they talked to in other locations, like a courthouse. They found the victims were very stressed, and it was very difficult for them to try to get as much information as they wanted. The other big issue that came up was their own personal safety. So we took that into consideration, and when you are aligned and working with the San Diego Family Justice Center or any Family Justice Center, you're generally going to have access to police officers. And when you have access to police officers, they are experts at safety and security. So when we developed our training program, which included advocates, interns, pro bono attorneys, law students, we had a specific class on safety planning for professionals working with victims going to the courthouse, and thanks to Sergeant Robert Keats, he developed that for us. So my recommendation is, as programs are being developed, that is a very important component that needs to be integrated in any training program. And I'm so glad that whoever asked this question, that as we go forward and start to provide additional training for our attorneys who are joining the Center for Solo Practitioners and the Justice Legal Network, we will maintain that program. Because our program was initially 40 hours, and I call it kind of like the Harry Potter selection of which hat do you want to wear. All of the volunteers worked and went to the training program, and then we did a rotation where they would work at the Family Justice Center, at the Alliance, and at the Restraining Order Clinic. So thank you for raising that question. It's an important one, and we're going to keep on doing it. We'll eventually make it available to all of you on our resource library.
There are a number of questions. Thanks, Gail. There are a number of questions that have also come in about kind of how we structured, why we picked 50 hours for the initial pro bono commitment, how we structured that, and how it relates to the needs of victims, because as you all know, the reality is that 50 hours goes really fast. And contested matters are going to take a lot more than 50 hours, and there's just no way you can meet all the legal needs with pro bono work, which is what we've talked about, of course, so much in this webinar. So I'm going to let both Lalise and Patrick talk a little bit about the pro bono piece, because in my experience, a lot of these lawyers, especially the ones involved with the Family Justice Center, have ended up putting in far more than 50 hours in their pro bono journey. But it's also allowed them to be able to develop ways that they can set up sliding scale approaches, really affordable sliding scale approaches. And it's also, as I mentioned, one of the reasons why we're going to provide funding for the lawyers to continue that work when their pro bono hours run out. But Lalise, can you talk a little bit, and then I'll ask Patrick to talk a little bit about the pro bono piece.
Thank you so much, Casey, and thank you to those of you who asked this very important question. I'm so glad you did, because I would like to make clear that the 50 hours is a minimum. And the 50 hours is tailored to the American Bar Association standard for the number of hours that lawyers should give, all lawyers without exception, should give each year to give back to society and to their communities. So as a minimum, we have 50 hours. And I was very careful not to go beyond that minimum for two reasons. One, I know from my own experience, and also from my experience working with people who have a community service bent, that when they get involved in even one pro bono case, they don't stop until it's done. They're passionate and they get it done. And to require them to do more hours was A, not necessary, and B, could even be somewhat problematic in that they were already going to give so much, or I felt that they would, and as Casey said, that was borne out many, many times over. Secondly, they are starting businesses, and so they have to balance the amount of work that they give away with the amount of work that they take on as a way to support their law practices and their families and themselves. The bottom line for me is that when you self-select, when you look for lawyers who are self-selecting for access to justice and public interest, that you will have no problem getting them to give as many hours as are necessary within reason, and that the amount of help and legal service provided to survivors of domestic violence is far, far more than if we weren't doing this at all.
That's great, Lalise. Thanks. Hey, Patrick, I'd love you to talk about that, because you've probably given more pro bono hours to this than anybody sitting at this table in the last few years. So can you talk a little bit about that piece?
Yes, I can. One of the questions that came in regarding the pro bono hours is whether or not that the pro bono hours during the time period, whether or not we include divorce, custody, immigration representation. We don't necessarily provide all of the representation for all of those matters. Another question also came in, I should elaborate on this, is whether or not we do representation of clients at the Family Justice Center in court. We do, on occasion, do representation for clients depending on whether or not we deem that it is absolutely necessary for them to have an attorney in court with them as opposed to a court advocate. And if their matter is severe enough that we feel that an attorney is absolutely necessary. But if we do provide an attorney, it does count obviously towards our pro bono hours. Now, again, we don't have to sign on, especially in California, we have what is known as limited scope. We don't have to sign on for every element or every matter under the case. So if they have a pending dissolution, divorce, custody, or immigration matter, we don't necessarily have to sign on as the attorney of record for each matter under that. But again, part of the clinical hours that I provided at the Family Justice Center and the other attorneys provided as well, we were able to guide clients in the direction they needed to go, and that counted towards the pro bono hours. So if they had questions about immigration, whether it was a U visa or other types of visas, then we were able to guide them where to go, where to get the resources, and how to apply for those visas themselves. Again, how to get custody of the children after the initial restraining order and even divorce, and what they should expect when the divorce is pending and finalized. Thank you, Casey.
Thanks, Patrick. One of the things that's very powerful about this model is that prior to the Center for Solo Practitioners and the Justice Legal Network, your typical domestic violence agency or your typical family justice center, if they couldn't meet the legal need, and here in San Diego, if we couldn't meet the legal need, we had to refer off victims to the bar referral line. We had to refer them off to legal aid or to whoever might be available with their 1-2 year waiting lists, with their inability to handle the cases. If we had victims that had some resources, that became problematic because not only could they not wait, but two, they might be ineligible if they had some income but couldn't really afford a lawyer. So having all these lawyers living with us, one, we're training, two, we know each other, we have a relationship with each other, and that has led to a far more significant set of services being provided to victims, and quite frankly, far more generosity from our lawyers who are willing to take very minimal amounts of money when victims have very little money, because they're here, they're with us, they're on our team, they're engaging. I've seen Patrick do that over and over again. So that piece is very exciting to us and significant. There's a number of other questions that I want to just quickly touch on. One question that came in says, do the accelerated attorneys have to have their space to do their non-alliance pro bono cases in an area separate from the alliance space to avoid any liability for the alliance or to avoid jeopardizing their nonprofit status by allowing for-profit work on the premises? It's an interesting question. The reality is that the National Family Justice Center Alliance is not a direct service provider. So let me just talk about that for a minute. We do not provide day-to-day services to victims of domestic violence in crisis in the offices of the Family Justice Center Alliance. The San Diego Family Justice Center, which we obviously support, is located 2 blocks away. So this kind of geographic setup works well from that standpoint. As far as the liability issue, any nonprofit is able to rent office space. We're part of a national initiative called Shared Spaces, where nonprofits are now renting out office space to folks to develop an income stream. Nonprofits can develop an income stream. There's nothing that's not prohibited of a nonprofit. A nonprofit is able to sell services and to rent office space on a cost recovery basis, which is what the Alliance essentially does. And what someone does in the practice that they do in their office space that they rent from us is not something that creates any liability for the Alliance. We've looked at this issue very closely. So that is not an issue. The only potential issue that could come up would be a conflict issue at times. We had some kind of a conflict issue, and we're obviously always challenging our attorneys to screen for those conflicts. But I do think that's an interesting issue, and we are thinking outside the box in this regard, because we now have 15 attorneys paying rent to the National Family Justice Center Alliance. In return, we have a lease with the building that we're in, and we pay over $10,000 a month in rent. And so those attorneys are helping us to cover our rent, while in turn also helping to meet the legal needs of victims and their kids. So it's really a win-win in that regard. There's a couple other questions that have come in. One has to do with the solo practitioners. Do solo practitioners provide representation as well as advice and counsel to individuals in legal clinics? I think Patrick pretty much answered that. The answer is yes, of course. Patrick and Ben Aguilar and a number of others here do these free clinics at the Family Justice Center to really help victims understand their needs and really help screen for kind of what's available to them. Sometimes victims have access to assets and sometimes they don't. If they have absolutely no assets at all, right now all we're left with is sending them off to an LAV provider or to a legal aid provider. Our hope is that if we can develop this Justice Legal Network and our actual Justice Promise Fund, that we're going to be able to offer a fixed fee approach. We've been studying a model called the Justice Cafe that's been developing in Atlanta, Georgia, and a number of other places around the country, where funding sources are funding a divorce at $250 or a set fee for a particular piece of litigation at $500, not an hourly basis, not even a sliding scale hourly basis. So we are looking to pilot that. We've already actually included a couple of cases with some initial funding we have to do that. We have lawyers here that have taken some fixed fee cases where the Alliance is actually providing the funding to the lawyer to represent a domestic violence victim that's come forward that has absolutely no financial resources at all. But this issue of sliding scale, which is sometimes very difficult for a full-time public interest lawyer to do, is something that we are also seeking to develop, where we have a true sliding scale. We're challenging the lawyers here to develop their own kind of consistent approach among both the center lawyers and the Justice Legal Network lawyers, so that'll be consistent in all of that. We've got quite a number of other questions about issues of insurance and representation. The answer is that every lawyer working here does have their own insurance. They have their own malpractice insurance, their own liability insurance. The Alliance also carries malpractice and liability insurance. Gail and I are both licensed attorneys in California, and we continue to practice law as part of our work, so we too have malpractice and liability insurance as part of our practices. So that does have to be addressed. Disclosures do have to be made so that clients do understand the difference between various legal entities. We're all co-located here. Camp Hope, California, the National Family Justice Center Alliance, Center for Solo Practitioners, soon the Justice Legal Network, the Training Institute on Strangulation Prevention. We're all living together and developing this community together. So yes, there is certainly a sense that we all have to make sure that when folks are coming here as clients, that they have a sense that of where they are. But on the other hand, if they have retained an attorney here and he or she is their private practice attorney, that doesn't involve the Alliance. That's a confidential relationship, attorney-client relationship between any individual solo practitioner and the client that has come here and has retained that attorney. There is a question about who supervises attorneys regarding the substantive areas of the law. And I'm going to let Lalise kind of touch on that, because that is a question that does come up. You know, these lawyers are here, they're part of the Center for Solo Practitioners, but on the other hand, they're all running their own private practices. So that is an incubator issue that has to be thought through and addressed, and I'll let Lalise touch on that.
Thank you so much, Casey. Yes, we get this question a lot. And I'll start by saying that I provide a tremendous amount of supervision and oversight to the lawyers in the program with respect to their practices in general. It has been no secret that for decades in legal education, there have been many, many people who have graduated law school and, quote, hung out their own shingle, unquote, and there are many, many lawyers who leave firms not fully prepared, but they leave firms and begin their own law practices. And there really has been a dearth of oversight in the legal profession. And this is the beginning of a sea change in the legal profession as a whole. In fact, the California State Bar has now issued a challenge and is working on putting together guidelines for California law schools to provide more oversight. And also the American Bar Association is doing the same. And I will tell you that there aren't many lawyers practicing right now without the kind of structure of being in an incubator or an accelerator who get the kind of one-on-one weekly counseling and accountability for their practices. And then as to the substantive areas, I practiced law for 22 years, or for 20 years. I'm now at 22 years. I can provide some substantive oversight. Where I cannot, I make personal introductions to experienced litigators, many of whom are certified specialists. I've been fortunate to know many, many people throughout the state of California. If I have to find Patrick a lawyer in Los Angeles who can advise him, I will do that. And in fact, Patrick is nodding at me because the person that I found for him is one of the best family law attorneys in the state of California and is a certified specialist, is highly trained, incredible credentials. And I make those introductions and I make that happen. And I can tell you from my experience practicing law and seeing some of the most unfortunate and shabby work out there, and Lisbeth can attest to that and did attest to that, that there are very, very few entities taking this kind of in-depth approach to working with folks who are newly starting their solo practices.
Thanks so much, Elise. Just one other question, and then I'm actually going to ask Fred Rooney to share a little bit with us. I think Fred's been able to join us. He's had a difficult challenge here in transport, but we want to wrap up with Fred sharing with us. But we did have some other questions about our ongoing relationship with traditional legal service provider programs, and the answer to that is absolutely yes. We want to see those partnerships develop. I think they play such a crucial and central role, and we have to be very much connected. We currently refer to all those local providers now. We still have ongoing communication and dialogue with them, and we would envision that continuing. That was the beginning of this whole vision, was getting all those providers in the room in 2008 at San Diego and brainstorming, and we want to continue to do that. And I don't think anybody should be going down this road of developing an incubator or an accelerator type model that's focused on services for victims of domestic violence and sexual assault without engaging traditional legal service providers that are working with those victims, whether they're working on an LAV grant or they're working out of a legal aid program or some type of other public funding. So that is an important piece. But our goal today was really to share with you how excited we are about this model as it's developing, as we're taking the lessons learned from Fred and others who have done such amazing work both in the United States and now with Fred's work around the world, and really figure out what this looks like for San Diego, how we can turn it into more of a community and not just a program, how it can integrate with social services, with mental health services, with medical services, with all the other needs of victims, whether it's developing a business, whether it's sending your kids to camp. It's all of those things that a multi-agency model has the ability to address along with legal services in order to be holistic and comprehensive. So we're excited about our journey here. We're learning a lot. And as we wrap up here, I do want to ask Fred to unmute himself. Fred, if you can. You are such an inspiration and a visionary to us in this incubator movement all over the United States, and we'd just love to have you share with us a few minutes before we wrap up our webinar.
Thank you so much. Sorry about what happened before I was talking, but I realized nobody was listening or nobody could hear me. So I'm glad to at least be able to say hi to you and all my friends in San Diego and people all across the United States. Again, I'm with Toro Law School, and prior to that I was with CUNY, and in this case you mentioned I started the first incubator in 2007. You know, one of the things that I realized, and many people in legal education realized, was that law school was a great place to learn all the theory that you need to know in order to pass the bar. But when it came to really helping students develop the practical skills they needed to practice law, they were not doing that. And so students were getting out of law school with virtually no practical experience and passing the bar and hanging out shingles and representing people who many times never had an idea that the lawyer really didn't know what he or she was doing. And so we started thinking about ways to be able to deal with the fact that law graduates needed to continue to be educated. And, we started to reflect back on the whole medical education programs, and we knew that no doctor would ever get out to start a medical practice, without having gone through internship and residency, because that's where you develop the skills that will help you to be a better physician. And so in many ways we looked at that model. We knew that we desperately needed to continue to educate law graduates who are now new lawyers. And then we looked at the business model, which was an incubator, and realized that if we could bring lawyers together under one roof, as is being done in San Diego and about 35 other places throughout the U.S., that we could really train lawyers in a way that would help them develop the kinds of skills that would make better community-based lawyers. We never thought for a second in 2007 that the idea would turn into a movement not only nationally but internationally at this point. But one of my dreams was to be able to work closely with the family justice centers all over the country and create incubators that would work in conjunction with them. Lilice and Thomas Jefferson and Luz Herrera were the real pioneers in getting a program off the ground, and it's been highly successful in San Diego, and is a program that we know can be replicated all over. One of the reasons that I truly believe that more than I did a couple of years ago is that it's possible to take lawyers who have virtually no knowledge of domestic violence and turn them into top-notch advocates for survivors is a model that we started sort of by default in the Dominican Republic. And it was the first time that we brought lawyers together specifically to teach them how to represent survivors of domestic violence. And that we were able to do through a grant through the U.S. State Department. And so young Dominican lawyers were learning for the first time what they needed to do in order to effectively deal with individuals in need. And they learned so quickly and became incredibly competent, compassionate, and caring advocates for women. For the most part, there's a tremendous issue of domestic violence, not only in the DR, but all over the world. And so the model has worked. It's working in San Diego. We know it works in Santo Domingo, and we know that it can continue to work all over the country. So I can't tell you how glad I am that that it's finally going to happen. And then I'm a true believer in the whole idea of all things in due time. But this is the time, and I know that with Casey and Gail and Lilice and everybody else who's been involved, Patrick, all of you, is that we can really take this model that you're looking to replicate and have it make tremendous impact on the lives of people who so desperately need access to justice and oftentimes don't have the resources or the services are not available for them when they need it. So thank you so much. Thank you for allowing me to put in my 2 cents, and I hope to work closely with you in the months to come.
Well, thanks so much, Fred, and we so much appreciate you wrapping up our webinar today. Fred is an amazing resource. He's been a resource to essentially every incubator that's developed around the United States. He continues to be not just the father of this work, but really a visionary, and we appreciate all his insight here. And we hope that whether it's a family justice center community or it's a community without a family justice center that has some kind of coordinated community response or has some kind of multi-agency model, that you will listen to this webinar and spread the word and reach out to us. You can email us. You can access Lilice McCoy off of FamilyJusticeCenter.com. You can access Gail and myself. We certainly will pass on any questions or contact with Fred Rooney if you want to reach out to Fred at the Toro Law Center. We so much appreciate your ability to think about this, process it, challenge us, ask questions. But the reality is that when it's all said and done, the way we've been doing it with good people doing good things for many years is still not meeting the needs. And we have to think outside the box, and we have to recruit this next generation of lawyers who are coming out of law schools across America to say you don't have to pick simply between public interest or the private practice of law. You can do both. And it doesn't just have to be about pro bono commitment. It can also be about ways that we can help pay the bills while you're doing this good work to help people. And we need a lot more funders in this space. We need a lot more folks to invest money in this. It's tough to fund civil legal services. There's very few funding sources in America right now. But the reality is that if we spent far more money on civil legal services, we would spend far less money in the criminal justice system. And we would spend far less money at the bottom of the cliff trying to put people's lives back together when the civil legal system has failed them. That's the calling of this work. That's our vision. That's our dream. And I want to thank you all for joining us today on behalf of Lilice McCoy and Patrick Long and Lisbeth and Gail and Jennifer Anderson and Talia Aguirre and the whole team at the Alliance, thanks so much for participating with us today. As I mentioned, I want to give a big shout out to the conference. We will do some work at our conference next April that will focus on this incubator and accelerator model that we're developing here. We will look forward to people joining us. That conference is already booking. Folks are already booking rooms at the hotel. We're going to sell out. Our capacity is only about 500. Registration actually starts October 1st for the conference. But on behalf of our entire team, I want to thank you for joining us today. And again, go for it. Dream big. Pursue something. Take something out of this and go try to figure out how to do something differently in the provision of legal services. And if you have access to a local law school, tell them to reach out to us. Reach out to Fred Rooney. Develop this model. We're proven it can work all over the country, and we're proven it can work in a way that can truly make a difference in the lives of victims of family violence and their children. So blessings on all of you for your work. Thank you for joining us today. On behalf of the National Family Justice Center Alliance, this is Casey Gwynn. I appreciate you participating. Thanks. Have a great day.